Thank you all for being here. I'm Rebecca Foose with the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library. Very happy to have you here for another one of our very interesting topics, Tuesday topics. And we thank our committee for coming up with some excellent topics and speakers for this series. So thank you to our committee members. And these are all available thanks to the donations of our donors like you. So thank you for your support as well. Today, the Inner Loop Reconstruction, and this will be presented by the Community Design Center of Rochester Executive Director Johnny Monroe and Creative Consultant Roger Brown. Johnny is a founding member and Executive Director of the Center, and under her leadership, the Center has extended its outreach to a 9-county region as the area's only nonprofit, community-driven advocate for planning and design of the built environment. Johnny holds master's degrees in architecture from Yale University, historic preservation from Columbia University, and education from the Warner School at the U of R. Roger, the creative consultant, Roger Brown, has been a practicing architect in New York State for over 35 years. He was associate partner with Barkstrom and LaCroix Architects for 27 years and is currently principal of the urban design consulting firm Urban Architecture. He's a founding member of the Center and its predecessor organization, the AIA Rochester Urban Design Committee. So at this point, we will hand it over to our experts to talk about the Inner Loop Reconstruction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's always interesting adjusting these mics. Can you all hear me? Well, Roger and I are very pleased to be here today as part of the Tuesday Topics, sponsored by the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library. The Community Design Center, as was just said, is Western New York's only independent nonprofit organization devoted to design excellence and sustainability for the built environment, providing design and planning assistance to municipalities, communities, and neighborhoods in the 9-county Greater Rochester region. And today we're very pleased to be able to announce a lecture tomorrow night, which is the kickoff lecture in our Reshaping Rochester series. And I'm supposed to be advancing here. Hold on. Here we go. Good. We have an annual Reshaping Rochester series that features leaders and great urban thinkers and designers. It features a mayor every year, and there's a complete schedule of this series out on the table. Mayor Coleman will be coming from St. Paul, Minnesota this year in April for a luncheon lecture. And tomorrow night we kick off with Victor Dover, who is an internationally famous and respected urban planner, architect, and designer. So he will be speaking at 7 o'clock at Gleason Works Auditorium on University Avenue, and we hope that you'll be able to attend. Now on to the topic today, which is the Inner Loop Reconstruction. Roger?
Johnny and I are going to tag team this, so we're going to be popping in and out as this presentation is being given. But I guess what we're going to do is give you an overview, a little bit of some of the history aspects of this, and then we're going to actually get into how the Inner Loop we actually came about over the years. And then at the end, we want to talk about the opportunities that exist and some of our thoughts on it and some examples from other communities around the country, and then get into a discussion about, for you to help talk to us about, what you view this project as being and what some of the opportunities are from your standpoint. This is a timeline that shows pre-war situations and pre-war history of various modes of transportation, starting with the horse-drawn omnibus in 1848. I was actually pretty surprised at how early this this form of transportation came about, but it was a company that was started, a horse-drawn omnibus that ran around Rochester, and eventually it went into a rail system in 1862. Now, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but we had talked about the idea of putting all of this online, and there's a lot of verbiage and so forth here in some of these slides that you may want to go back at and take a look at and understand a little bit further. There's a lot of information here that we're going to be giving. So we just want to let you know that it is going to be available. This is a plan, 1858, that really shows what Rochester looked like as it was created, as its urban fabric was created by the pedestrian and by the horse and the horse and buggy. It was very compact. There was a lot of interconnection between the streets. It was, pretty interesting how this all looked on the ground. And it really was from this that really in a way our current fabric is structured. Obviously, there have been changes and so forth. The Erie Canal had a major, piece in creating the downtown. But when the horse and omnibus sort of started, things started to change over time. And downtown looked like this around the 1900s. And you can see bicycles, you can see wagons, you can see rails down the middle of Main Street, and you can see a lot of pedestrians. And it was really a pedestrian city, and that's important to know. And then around the 1900s, when the electric streetcar came into play, and the automobile started to rear its ugly head, as some people would say. Here, here's what it looked like. Again, it was very much a pedestrian city. Automobiles were like around 1900. There's like 400 of them, roughly, in the city. And about 10 years later, there were 4,000 of them. And then after that, as we'll see, it really multiplied. That streetcar went into the neighborhoods. It really serviced a huge population. There was a phenomenal network of transit like that. This is a typical street in downtown Rochester, Richmond Street.
One will be reconnected too.
And this is one, it's true, that will be reconnected and in the plan that's being developed. But this is what the fabric of downtown really looked like in those days. And then along came the assembly line. 1913 was really when things started to ramp up. And the amount of cars that started to enter the streets was really a great number, such that it caused transportation engineers and planners to look at the situation and to figure out what can we do. This is the Harlan-Bartholomew plan of 1929. And what's interesting about this plan is this. So in 1929, the idea of making a loop road around the city first started to be talked about. And you can see the major streets that would come in from the surrounding area all coming into this situation here, and then dispersing throughout the city. And they were major changes that were made to the fabric internally too, that really started to affect the future. Here's an aerial shot in 1930 of what the city looked like. The red line indicates Union Street, the street that's now being created or recreated again from what the inner loop used to be like, and which is outlined here in yellow. You can see where the loop was and how it was put upon the landscape. You want to?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So at the same time, on the world stage, that this plan was made, French architect Le Corbusier, a leader of the modernist movement in architecture, was proposing concepts in urban design that would ultimately influence development in cities for decades to come. Where's Clifford?
Oh, it's over here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
He viewed cities as crowded and dirty, with a lack of what he termed moral landscape, and saw space as a destination, a set of destinations which mankind moved between more or less continuously with an automobile as a transporter. He favored the idea of freeways in urban spaces, and his philosophies were useful to urban real estate development interests in the American post-World War II period because they justified and lent architectural and intellectual support to the desire to destroy traditional urban space for high-density, high-profit urban concentration, both commercial and residential. His ideas also sanctioned further destruction of traditional urban spaces to build freeways that connected to low-density, low-cost, and highly profitable suburban and rural locales to be developed as middle-class, single-family housing, isolating urban neighborhoods remaining in the wake of this road construction.
So this is, I guess, it's Cabrini Green in Chicago, and Hanover houses here in our own city was sort of, this kind of construction occurred all around the country. But again, it's sort of based on Le Corbusier's concept, if you will, of how to house people. Meantime, the 1939 New York World's Fair occurred. General Motors had its Futurama exhibit, and this shows all the folks being transported around this huge model of what the future of our cities could look like. And it was sort of tried to accommodate the automobile in an expressway system and create housing that was very similar to the Le Corbusier model. So a lot of high-rises, a lot of expressways, and he would argue that these were all buildings in a park. But it's amazing how destructive this kind of construction occurred in certain parts of the country. So it just was an interesting, era in planning as we went forward into the early 1900s, which this is a plan of Rochester in the early 1900s. Again, you can see 1950 actually, right? I'm sorry, showing what the downtown map looked like. Again, the red is Union Street, and again, sort of the fabric is about the same as what it always was, but things were slowly happening. People were starting to move away from the downtown. 1951 shows what this looks like again from the air. Areas in the downtown were sort of becoming underutilized, and there were really situations there when the consequences of people moving out and away. Again, here's the loop. Again, here's the Bartholomew plan. Traffic engineers started really looking at what are we going to do here in a city of, at this point in time, was about 300,000 people. And they were trying to figure out where can we put these cars. So the idea of the inner loop again started to come forth. And this was one of the very first renditions and plans for the inner loop done by the Rochester City Planning Commission in 1951. And you'll notice one of the interesting things about it is this little section right here. This is actually Plymouth Avenue. And at the time, they were going to essentially do the loop like this. And as you know, ultimately this loop came around here. And I'm not exactly sure why all of that happened, but it just shows you. And also, some of the interchanges, this little idea of a loop, of a circular roundabout, there's little things that the planners were thinking of in those days, that some of which obviously never transpired. The loop did, of course. So if you want to do another timeline, this is the timeline post-war, showing the various phases and stages of not only construction, but of how some housing occurred simultaneously. and some of the developments that are leading up to the plan that we have now that's under construction. There was an awful lot of areas that were demolished simultaneous with the loot going in. This actually is where the Urban Development Corporation of New York State came along and proposed this gigantic project of housing that was meant to be mixed income housing. Again, you can see the expressway, here, and then this huge parking lot created along the edge. Some of these buildings were built, not many. This is Manhattan Square. But the idea originally, in a city whose population now was starting to shrink, with all of the flight of going out into the, into the suburbs, visually, here's what that looks like. And in 1960, you can start to see some of the construction going on. The northern section was really the first section that was looked at and started to be built. There's some urban renewal going on up here, and later on you'll see this is where the UDC project was created. Again, the red line is Union Street. And here's another shot a little bit later. The upper portion of the loop has been completed. They're starting to, this is the Plymouth Avenue piece. They're starting to demolish and clear land for the Union Street, the east end of the loop. It's again just sort of leading up to the finality of its completion in '65. Now, we have this very interesting video
The important
here
thing, of
about
course, is that the heart of the city has a booming beat, stronger than ever before. Times change, and you either change your city to fit them, or they'll change your city, often unpleasantly, more often unprofitably. Rochester has made its peace with the automobile. Is it practical to do otherwise? Does it make any civic sense whatsoever to cuss the tyranny of wheels and the insolent chariots, instead of getting together to plan a workable solution for traffic congestion? 20th century America is geared to the automobile, and thus is Rochester geared. Traffic flows here, flows faster all the time, because of community planning for the years ahead. Coincidentally, there is one of the best traffic safety records here of any city in the country. Believe me, friend, if you're driving more these days and enjoying it less, come to Rochester. Here.
So that's the mentality of the day here in Rochester and throughout the country, frankly. But here in Rochester, it really showed. Though people hopping in those cars, they may be running around the city at times for work, but at the end of the day, they're all heading out to the suburbs and creating the situation that we see out there, and we know so well that occur. So the car was king, and it really pervaded the life that we live, and it made major changes to our whole cultural system. Today, Rochester looks like this. There's the loop, it's completed. The red line again is Union Street. The loop, as we know, looks like this. And this is the part that's being worked on as we speak to be filled in. Other things that happened were, the red here indicates parking lots. Surface parking lots. We
just won an award for this.
Yeah, that's true. We won an award for having the most land taken over for parking of any city in the country. It really shows what happens when, a couple of things are happening. The population has shrunk down now to 210,000, so a lot of this vacant land, there used to be buildings on many of these places, and they were demolished, and in place were put parking lots. And people still believe that there's not enough parking yet downtown. At any rate, this is a really interesting drawing. two other movements were occurring simultaneously as all of this demolition was occurring and as the automobile was being worshipped more. The preservation, people really started to get extremely upset with the demolitions going on in Rochester. Fabulous buildings were removed, as we all know, the train station, but other wonderful structures. And around the country, the preservationists got together to start to look at and be serious about where are we going with all of this construction honoring the automobile. Simultaneously was the new urbanism movement in the 80s, the early 80s. In fact, one of our speakers, the one tomorrow at the Reshaping Rochester series, is one of the forefront movers and shakers of that movement. And I'm sure he's going to have a lot to say about our streets in this city. But new urbanism was a major, major piece and force in making people look back upon how communities were created. Their walkability, their focus on the pedestrian as opposed to the automobile, the idea of bringing back tighter, close-knit, urban kinds of form and urban structures into a more cohesive community kind of affair. In our area, Vision 2000 in 1990 was probably the very first plan that was done for downtown. Downtown Rochester really didn't have a formal vision plan or a community plan. This Vision 2000 was really the first, and it looked like this. And over on this side is, in fact, the Union Street. This is probably the first time that a planner, and a movement, if you will, for doing a plan for downtown, looked at the inner loop and said, "This is ridiculous. We should do something about this. This would be a great opportunity." Because at that time, too, it wasn't really being utilized that effectively. So maybe it would be better utilized if we used the land instead of for cars, we'd use it for people. And so they were suggesting all along of making Union Street again and lining it with residential mixed-use kinds of buildings. There's a lot of things going on in this plan, and there's a lot of things that never happened, but there was also a lot of things that did happen. One of them is this piece of property right here is now where the Sagamore is. And you can see that the piece next door is slated to be a high-rise kind of structure also. And if you were to look at that three-dimensionally, this is what that plan looked like. Again, you can see the density that was created along the edge here, the walkable boulevard or pedestrian way here, and the development that occurred in the Grove Street area, the area along Main Street. There were a lot of different other pages in this plan that showed three-dimensional renditions of what the downtown might look like. Then the city, in conjunction with the design center, in conjunction with actually one of the folks that has done a lot here for the library, John Lovenheim, we all got together and said, let's do a design charrette in the community, bring the community together to look at and to continue the planning ideas that had been started with Vision 2000. So what you see on the screen is actually a drawing that was created at the charrette, which was held right here in this room. And out in the lobby, there was like a couple hundred people, I think, that came to that
250 people
from the community.
Yeah.
And so we all got together and created what was then the 2000 vision plan for downtown. And it showed, again, taking the Union Street down here, and again, following the ideas that were talked about in Vision 2000 in 1990. So this plan was done in the year 2000. Larry Stidd, who was the planning director at the time, was one of the motivators for that to happen. And ultimately what he did, he and his city planning department created the Center City Master Plan to be the sort of the guide for the future development for the city for years to come. And again, I didn't want to do that. But again, right here is, again, Union Street and the residences along there, which they heartily approved. And again, if you look at this plan closely, and you'll be able to, you'll see a lot of other development that was going on.
And there were a lot of ideas from that charrette that they incorporated into their plan, which was great, because it was citizen-generated.
Meantime, other studies were going on relative to what to do, how to make the loop and that section of the loop something a lot more viable than as a moat. So out of these workshops came again, and one other thing, politically what happened was that the change in administration decided that they really didn't want to look at this total picture, so they took the plan off of the website. And for several years, you couldn't find this plan, or the plan that I showed later. So we got together again in 2007 to have another design charrette, and let's bring forth the idea again of doing a master plan for the city. So we did. We got together, and for 3 days, 130 design professionals from this community and the neighbors, like 400 or 500 citizens, came up with and crafted a plan for the downtown to bring it back up to people's attention. And this was the plan that was done. And so this is in 2008. And again, it shows the Union Street corridor along here, in that endeavor. And again, it's interesting, and you'll see how it changed, how there are different design ideas and different ways of approaching, that. But in all cases, it was made into a street. The loop as we know it was removed and eliminated, which is where we are basically today. This is the inner loop as it exists. The city was finally successful in obtaining dollars with which to not only do the final design, but to actually create and do the construction. There was a huge amount, we think, because they really interfaced with us an awful lot as far as asking for input from the Design Center, and I know there was a tremendous amount of input that was afforded the community to give also. Right now, this is the plan that's being used, and we'll get into the plan itself in a little more detail, but Stantec, which is one of the design engineers, has put together a really interesting video. This is a little older than what is currently, but it is pretty much the same as what will occur here. How many have seen that video? Just for the, wow, okay. There, I think there is another one, a newer one, I could be wrong on this, that it's on, that's accessible online, that shows the more up-to-date one. That's interesting. That one that you saw had a lot of trees down the middle of the street. Those trees actually have been moved to the edges where the pedestrian walks as opposed to where the car is. So there's a lot more trees on the edges. And the other thing that was created was a bike lane. I'm going to show you really quickly, because I want to get into some of the future pieces of what the plan that was created in the 2008 plan looked like, and how the current rendition has been. This, unfortunately, at either end, and everybody, including the city, is relatively disappointed as the power of the Department of Transportation has had, or New York State, and the ends of the loop really haven't been done as satisfactorily as the city and others would have it. The traffic engineers from the state level still have the power in doling out the money to actually create the rest of it, but they had their own ways of seeing how it should be done. However, the other part, the part from Monroe to Maine, has been actually pretty well done and pretty well received. This again is the plan that the vision plan showed, and this is the extension, the potential Margaret Woodbury Strong Boulevard that would go along the edge of the Strong Museum. And these are the housing or the mixed uses. And then here's Union Street here. This is, in fact, what the plan is set up to be like in the future. So very much all the things that were shown in the plan and envisioned by the community can happen and have to. I know. This is East Avenue. There's a green space. This is what they're contemplating. As you can see, the green space isn't there, but the opportunities for it to happen, exist. This is Charlotte Street, and this is what the Charlotte Street, again, is a street that's connected back up to the city grid, and at the end is the intersection of Maine. Now, what we're going to show you here is this is the Okay. In the charrette, a drawing was created to bring back from the historic triangular park that existed. The main feature of this was to take University and extend it on through and connect it. And that would create this park here. The city, the current plan actually is this, but the city this is sort of a placeholder. Most of the money to do the development ended up at Charlotte Street. The opportunity still exists to take Union Street and run it through, or University. So here's some possibilities. The idea here is not, this isn't a car solution, although the automobile is certainly important. But the idea here is to make Union Street a physical place for people to be. So it's all about placemaking. It's all about what we call the public realm and creating a space that's extremely viable and usable and friendly and vibrant for the community. Like Gibb Street and East Avenue is probably one of our premier streets, in the city. And here's some examples potentially of what this might look like from various communities around the world, or the country really. That's Lewisburg. This is actually from the New Urbanists. This is a brand new community here. And Union Street could, in fact, take on the character of this. This is the idea of taking a street and making more green space, similar to what was done over in, in South Wedge. Or the opportunity exists to put an actual park in front of potential, maybe a high-rise. This was Franklin Square in the early 1900s. It has been blown away by the expressway, as we know. And the idea of trying to bring back this kind of, planning and kind of space would be very, very good to see. Creating sustainable urbanism that is friendly with nature and that is friendly with the pedestrian. The making of bike lanes, which is one of the major pluses in this particular plan, the incorporation of a bike lane. And down the road, even potentially a streetcar might occur, or if nothing else, a circulator might happen, which would go around the city and connect to this street. Creating sustainable stormwater drainage possibilities exist, like this in Charlotte, or in Boulder. The idea of planting many, many, many trees, because trees are a phenomenal, let's say, way to capture and to take stormwater and treat it, as opposed to just putting it down a pipe, or making places for people to congregate and to eat. This is a street in Boulder, Colorado, which we look at sometimes as being a good model. It is a long linear street. And some of the others around the country show various great opportunities, whether it's contemporary or whether it's traditional, of how to edge Union Street and create the public realm, if you will, that is so desirable and that would replace, obviously, the moat. The other idea of creating mixed income projects, projects like the mills, is very much a project for everybody to enjoy, from the market rate to the lower income families. One of the things that we think has to be done is creating sort of a design guideline, or a smart code, if you will, for this land, like they did in College Town. Before they developed this, they actually had a community charrette, and they did develop some design guidelines for its construction. Now, there's some things that we would do differently here, especially there's a certain amount of sameness that occurred along that stretch, and you'll see that as it's being developed. I think this is one thing that might want to be reconsidered, and the design guidelines could sort of talk about that and make it happen, that you don't have that same kind of monotony. So here's where we are right now. There's ways of dividing up the parcels. They could be divided up even further than what you see here. So that would sort of bring in the opportunities for smaller developers, as far as the larger developers, to actually build on this site. And here is a list of potential positives that this project could lend, especially the idea of reconnecting the urban fabric, and especially the opportunity to create vibrant public space, and focusing on the pedestrian and so forth. So again, this list here we don't have to go through, but you can read it and see it. So that is essentially the end of our presentation.